Okay, so diving right into it today, I'm taking off the rear spoiler supports in order to tape off, mark, and cut the supports for the stock taillights that should come with the DF kit, but I wasn't really a huge fan of those and decided that I was going to cut this off and try my own thing, so we'll see how it goes. I realized I could have used an angle grinder here, but I figured I'd get a little bit of a cleaner cut with a hacksaw going a little bit slower. Turns out that's not the case. I made this little taillight bracket for the taillights that I'm going to use by cutting off the bracket that came with them, drilling a hole, and essentially just putting a riv nut through the center of it. Luckily, it was the perfect depth and cost. Let's see how it goes. Next up was the transmission lines. I removed the two stock brackets and kept the lower one, but cut off a little tab that was hanging off to the side. This is the supplied DF transmission cable bracket, and these went on fairly easily, but just like everything else on this car, I had to take it off because the transmission lines were backwards. This is a very rough and ultimately futile attempt to try and get the front wheels aligned as best as possible before having to do an actual alignment for the car. You'll see that I had to remove the lower control arm and just kind of twist it in order to get it to extend a little bit because the bracket that holds the hub on is very, very difficult to get off, and this was ultimately easier. The brakes were one of the few things on this car that went on relatively smoothly. I had to clean out where the caliper pins go because after powder coating it was pretty rough. I'm guessing they media blasted in there and just didn't really clean up very well. Put a generous amount of grease on all of the parts, including the back sides of the pads, and then placed on the outer portion of the brakes. Here's where the real fun begins. So these are obviously the seat belts. They went in super easy and relatively quickly, but I cannot say the same for the seats. They were one of the more difficult portions of the car to put together. The brackets didn't line up perfectly with the seats, and in the position that I wanted them in, which is all the way forward, ended up binding the front corner of the seat onto the shifter linkage, so that's a problem that I had to solve next. Okay, so you may or may not be able to tell, but the shifter linkages are rubbing on the sides of the seat. Now, in order to prevent that from happening, I'm going to move this left linkage down to this bottommost hole here. It'll give us a longer throw for the shifter, but I'm willing to sacrifice that if it'll mean that we can prevent any sort of rubbing on the seat here. As for the far one, I'm going to move that seat all the way back in hopes that that's going to give me enough room that side is also freed up. So let's give it a shot and see what happens. Okay, pause. Now, while that sounds like a wonderful idea, that's not what I ended up doing. Instead, what I did was I peeled the cover off of the back of the seat and the bottom of the seat in order to gain access to the foam underneath, and cut a channel for the shifter linkage to sit in so that the seat would no longer interfere with the operation of the shifter linkage, and turns out it worked great. You can see. We'll go into first now, second. When it goes into reverse though, it'll bump into itself here, so I added a little rubber mat in order to prevent it from getting scratched because it was starting to get messed up. One of the last things on the list in order to get the seats completely installed is to wrap the shoulder belts around the rear bar. There's a very specific way to do this, and so for the first seat belt, I didn't video record it because I wanted to make sure that I was doing it properly, but it's simple enough that for the second seat, I ended up just video recording it and going off memory. I had to adjust this thing quite a few times in order for the shoulder straps to sit evenly on both sides, but eventually got it and zip tied the extra fabric up instead of cutting it. Never cut the seatbelt fabric. At this point, the car was looking so complete that I really wanted to get the wheels on just to kind of take a look at what it was gonna ultimately look like. These are super cheap wheels that came on the Cobalt. They are obviously Volk knockoffs. They are called Falcons, which means that they're very, very fast. I don't think the white looks terrible, but it does not match the rest of the car, so I have plans to paint the wheels. I'm not 100% sure what color I want to go with that, but I guess we'll see in the future. Did a couple of things off camera. You can see that there's a double-decker spoiler on the back of the car now, as well as cleaned up headlight wiring. So there you have it. Car's basically ready to drive. It just needs some fluids, check for leaks, and a little bit of an alignment before it goes out on the road for the first time. Unfortunately, we just got dumped on with a ton of snow, so it's probably going to be a little bit before I'm able to actually pull it out of the garage. But I'll keep you guys updated as much as possible, and I'll see you in the next one.